Imagine a high-stakes corporate thriller, the kind you read in novels. But this one isn't fiction. It's ripped straight from the headlines. This is the true story of Denel, South Africa's, well, revered state-owned arms manufacturer.
A real powerhouse, or it was meant to be.
Exactly. And how it became this unlikely target of a really calculated corporate heist. It was once a cornerstone of national defense, a symbol of pride.
And technological capability, definitely.
Right. And suddenly it found itself utterly at the mercy of this shadowy cabal.
It's a story that really, really defines state capture, but on such an industrial scale. The sheer audacity of it.
Yeah.
It's quite astounding.
It really is.
And the implications, for national security, the economy, public trust, it's profound. It's almost a textbook case of how deep corruption can actually go.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today. Our mission here is to pull back the curtain on this whole dramatic true crime saga. We're going to explore the audacious plot, how it unfolded right at the highest levels. We'll introduce you to the key players, the faces behind the scheme.
Villains, maybe?
Perhaps. And we'll meticulously trace this intricate web of corruption that, nearly brought a crucial national asset completely to its knees.
It's a complex web, all right.
We'll trace that insidious process, how lucrative contracts, strategic ventures, they're all diverted. How dedicated executives were purged.
Just pushed out.
Pushed out. And how public funds were siphoned off with, frankly, astonishing brazenness. And then, as the story shifts, we'll look at the hunt for justice.
Right, the fight back.
Exactly. Focusing specifically on how South African authorities, especially the Asset Forfeiture Unit, the AFU, are scrambling now to recover these vast sums that were looted.
It's a global chase, really.
It is. And trying to bring the perpetrators to account, often across international borders.
And for this deep dive, our main source, it has to be said, is the exhaustive Zondo Commission report, the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into State Capture.
That massive investigation.
Massive, specifically Part 2, Volume 2, which focuses squarely on Denel. But we've also pulled in related news analysis, court documents, expert testimony, all sorts of things.
Right.
They all help paint this vivid and honestly quite disturbing picture of this betrayal. These aren't just whispers or allegations anymore.
No.
These are findings compiled after years of really digging deep.
So before we get into the darker side, the capture itself, maybe we should set the scene. Understand what Denel actually was before all this happened. It's golden years, perhaps.
Yeah, that's important context. Denel SOC Limited, it was officially established back in 1992, came out of a split from Armscor.
Okay.
And it quickly became this really critical manufacturer of military gear for the SANDF, the South African National Defense Force.
And what was its scale like, say, in the early 2010s before the capture really took hold?
Well, it was far from small or struggling then. It was a significant player, a really expansive operational footprint.
How big were they talking?
We're talking 5 distinct divisions, 3 subsidiaries, 4 international associated companies. It was complex, integrated, and the workforce. Over 3,000 people. And here's the key bit. 60% of them were highly skilled. Artisans, technicians, engineers, scientists.
Wow, so a real hub of expertise.
Absolutely. Not just a factory line. It was known for its work in missiles, artillery, military vehicles, a huge repository of national capability.
And they weren't just focused domestically, were they? They had global ambitions.
No, definitely not. They had strategic market ambitions across the Middle East, Africa, South America, the Far East. They're competing internationally.
So a global player.
Yeah.
But as you hinted, it wasn't all smooth sailing before that. There was a tough period, maybe 2005 to 2010.
That's right, yeah. It went through a challenging phase, consistent financial losses for about half a decade there.
But then things changed. The Zondo Commission talks about this remarkable turnaround.
It really was remarkable. After 2010, things started to shift dramatically, mainly under the 2011 board, initially chaired by Mr. Zoli Kune, then later Mrs. Marty Jancy Van Rensburg.
Okay.
And the real driving force was the group's CEO, Mr. Riaz Saloojee. He came in January 2012.
And what did they achieve?
Well, the numbers speak for themselves. Revenue soared from about R3.2 billion in 2011 to an incredible R6 billion in 2015.
Double.
Pretty much. And they went from constant losses to posting significant profits between 2011 and 2015. By 2015, they reported a net profit of R$200 million after tax.
R$200 million profit, and I read the order book was over R$35 billion.
Exactly. An impressive position for any company, let alone an SOE with that history of losses.
And this wasn't just internal spin, was it? There were external validations.
No, absolutely not. Deloitte did an independent board effectiveness evaluation called Denel highly effective. The Auditor General gave them clean and unqualified audits consistently.
Clean audits, wow.
Yeah. This success was public knowledge, openly celebrated, even Minister Lynne Brown in her budget speech May 15, 2015.
What did she say?
She publicly praised Denel's performance. Even joked, maybe we should second your CEO Saloojee to ESCOM as well.
That's quite something, given what happened next. Praising the CEO, she'd effectively help push out later.
It's incredibly stark, isn't it? That praise came just months before that same high-performing board was purged. It just underscores that the reasons for the sabotage weren't about performance at all.
No, clearly not.
It was purely predatory. But despite this strength, this turnaround, there was this underlying vulnerability, something the captors would exploit.
And that was
the massive Hofister program.
Ah, Hofister, the Badger Combat Vehicle Project. This was that multi-billion rand contract from way back in 2007. Denel Landward Systems got it for 217 new infantry vehicles.
That's the one.
So this wasn't just any project. It sounds like the project that became Denel's Achilles heel. Is that fair?
I think that's very fair. These huge mega projects, especially when they hit trouble, they become massive pressure points. It wasn't just straining finances.
Oh.
It creates this sort of desperate need for solutions, for quick fixes, and that can blind an organization, make them vulnerable to, well, illicit suggestion.
We've seen that pattern elsewhere in state capture, haven't we? The sheer scale of a public project becomes its biggest risk.
Exactly. Hofister was like a ticking time bomb. It was plagued by severe delays, missed its 2012 completion target. I mean, it was still incomplete in 2021.
A decade late.
Almost. And way over budget. Significantly over budget, which meant they had to outsource critical components like the armored vehicle hulls.
Outsourcing. The door opens.
Precisely. That internal strain, the need for speed, the budget pressure, the reliance on outside suppliers, it created this glaring weakness, a vulnerability just waiting to be exploited by people with a very, very specific agenda.
And this leads us right to the architects of this capture, the main players in this whole drama.
The dramatis personae, as the commission puts it.
Right. And at the absolute center, identified unequivocally by the Zondo Commission, the infamous Gupta family, Ajay, Atul, and Rajesh. For our listeners familiar with state capture, what was their specific role regarding Denel?
The commission was blunt. They were the central orchestrators, a shadowy cabal, their single objective, to hollow out Denel from the inside. It wasn't accidental, it was planned.
And their base of operations.
Their infamous Saxonwold compound in Johannesburg. It wasn't just a home, it was, a strategic hub. Influence peddling, illicit operations. Like a shadow command center where deals got done.
And the commission found they weren't interested in playing by the rules.
Not at all. The crucial finding, they were not prepared to compete for Denel's business. Legitimately, why bother? They just used intense pressure, blatant manipulation, bypassed all the proper procurement processes.
They didn't act alone. They had a key lieutenant, didn't they? Mr. Salim Essa?
Yes, Salim Essa. Described as a businessman with close ties to the Guptas. He was their primary associate, the conduit to many deals that wrecked Denel.
So he was the hands-on guy.
Very much so, the operational arm. He was pivotal, not just in the strategy, like acquiring VR Laser, we'll get to that, but also in directly approaching key Denel executives. Paving the way, making the calls, setting up those meetings.
At Saxonwold, perhaps.
Seems likely. His involvement got international attention, too. He was sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury under the Global Magnitsky Act. That freezes U.S.-linked assets, shows the global reach of this network.
Beyond the Guptas and Essa, the commission pointed to alleged political enablers. Then President Jacob Zuma, often called number one, or the old man, how direct was his alleged involvement in the Denel side of things?
Testimony presented him as the source of very top support, essentially giving the Guptas his backing for their schemes. Witnesses claim that the Guptas explicitly used his name to apply pressure.
And the family connection.
His son, Duduzane Zuma, got a stake in VR Laser via Weston Investments, a Gupta company. That directly tied the family financially to the vehicle used for capture. It provided this powerful top-down pressure, making it incredibly hard for officials to push back.
Then there was Mr. Malusi Gigaba, Minister of Public Enterprises from 2010 to 2014. He met Denel's CEO, Saloojee, at the Gupta compound soon after Saloojee was appointed. The Zondo Commission called his conduct a violation of the Constitution. What does that actually mean here?
It means he consciously abused his power. The finding was he used his position of authority to solicit SOEs for business for his friends. Meeting Denel's CEO at Saxonwold, that sent a crystal clear message about whose interests mattered.
And he denied the meeting.
He did, but the commission dismissed his denial as highly improbable, suggesting, a deliberate attempt to hide his role. This wasn't just looking the other way, it was active facilitation.
After Gigaba came Mrs. Lynne Brown, minister from 2014 to 2018. We heard she initially praised Saloojee and Denel's turnaround.
Yes, publicly lauded them.
But then she oversaw the replacement of that very effective board under, quote, murky circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
Effectively, the commission found wittingly helping the Guptas install their loyalists.
Right.
And her denials about knowing Selimessa.
Blown out of the water by cell phone records. 8 conversations, over 23 minutes total, between her phone and Essa's. Direct evidence.
So what was the commission's final word on her?
Unequivocal. She was a witting participant in the Gupta schemes. Her actions weren't just negligence, they showed active collusion. Removing a good board, replacing it with Gupta allies, all while claiming ignorance publicly. Just reveals the depth of the capture project.
Truly damning.
Yeah.
But capture needs insiders too. Willing accomplices within Denel. Mr. Daniel Mantsha, appointed chair of the 2015 board by Minister Brown.
Mantsha.
His background is striking. He'd been struck off the roll of attorneys for severe misconduct between 2001 and 2007, including trust account issues.
Yes, a deeply compromised history.
And the commission found he must have been chosen by the Guptas, acted as a witting agent of state capture, personally benefited from them, traveled on their dime, called him a deliberately untruthful witness. How does someone like that get appointed?
Well, the commission's inference is key. He was likely chosen because he was compromised. His history suggested a willingness to bend or break rules, making him perfect for those wanting to subvert processes.
So his weakness was his strength to them.
Exactly. His appointment signals a deliberate failure of due diligence, or rather, a deliberate choice to ignore it. And the personal benefits just cemented his role as their inside man.
Then Mr. Saloojee, who became acting group CEO after Saloojee was suspended. Initially, he seemed resistant to the Guptas.
There were signs of initial resistance, yes, but later he developed a compromising relationship with Essa.
And as acting CEO.
He just shrugged off critical due diligence findings, approved dubious single-source contracts, the Denel Asia venture, even explicitly overruling Malambo's rejection of these bad deals.
What does his journey tell us about the pressure, maybe?
It's a stark example of how that pressure worked. His initial resistance shows some recognize the danger, but the system was designed to wear people down or co-opt them. His eventual actions suggest either immense pressure, direct compromise, or maybe a calculated decision to just go with the flow, the capturing flow. He became an internal facilitator.
And Mr. Steven Berger, CEO of Denel Land Systems, DLS, he persistently argued for VR Laser, pushed through irregular contracts even when supply chain officials warned him.
Yeah, Berger was key at the divisional level.
His later begrudging concession that it was irregular, but he did it anyway. The commission called his attitude reckless and wrong. Was he negligent or complicit?
His actions speak volumes, don't they? His claimed frustration with Denel's procurement processes became this convenient excuse to just bypass them, directly benefiting VR Laser, conceding irregularity later, but pushing ahead. That suggests a serious lack of ethical integrity, a disregard for Denel's well-being, prioritizing illegitimate gains over rules.
But thankfully, it wasn't everyone. There were resistors, people who became victims. Mr. Riaz Saloojee, the successful CEO, 2012-2015.
Saloojee, yes, the one who turned things around.
From the start, he rebuffed the Guptas, insisted they use proper channels, even confided he felt immense pressure, didn't know who to trust inside Denel because of the Guptas' reach.
A chilling atmosphere.
And despite his success, praised by Minister Brown, the new board suspended him on baseless grounds, forced him out with a big settlement. A dramatic fall.
It's a real tragedy of leadership. Saloojee was exactly what Denel needed. Competent, ethical, rule-bound. His resistance made him target number one. The fact he didn't know who to trust internally. That speaks volumes about the infiltration. Being praised one minute, fired the next. It proves performance meant nothing. Only loyalty to the capture project mattered.
And he wasn't the only one purged. Mr. Fakil Malantlo, the group CFO, and Mrs. Elizabeth Africa, the group company secretary, suspended alongside Saloojee. Same mysterious, unsubstantiated reasons.
It shows how methodical it was. A targeted strike. Remove the CEO, the CFO who holds the purse strings, and the company secretary who ensures governance compliance all at once.
Paralyzes the controls.
Exactly. Paralyzes financial control, governance safeguards, clears the path for dodgy deals with no internal checks.
Then there was Mrs. Marty Jancy van Rensburg, the interim chair from the successful 2011 board. An experienced chartered accountant, the commission called her a good witness.
Her testimony was vital. She gave this credible, independent view, praised the old board's achievements, sharply criticized the replacement board's lack of skills.
Especially the lack of a CA.
Yes. Her highlighting that the new board had no chartered accountant, almost unthinkable for a major SOE, showed these appointments weren't about competence. They were about compliance to the Guptas. It exposed the sabotage.
And Mr. Kagutso Tilakudi from the Department of Public Enterprises, the oversight body, he was deliberately excluded from selecting the 2015 Denel board.
Yes, Tlakudi's exclusion is significant.
Why is excluding an oversight official so telling?
Because the DPE is supposed to ensure good governance in SOEs. By cutting out a senior, knowledgeable official like Tolakudi from vetting, Minister Brown bypassed the institutional safeguards. It allowed compromised individuals onto the board. She basically disarmed the DPE's ability to stop it.
And within Denel's operations, Ms. Celia Malalela at DLS Supply Chain and Mr. D. Malambo, the group's supply chain executive.
Supply chain heroes.
They consistently raised sound, responsible, and lawful objections to the irregular VR laser contracts, advocated for competitive, transparent processes, but their advice was ignored, their authority undermined. Malambo's stance was praised as fully justified by the commission. The pressure on them must have been immense.
Their resistance is remarkable, true courage within a rotten system. They understood the Constitution. Section 217 public procurement must be fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, cost-effective. Their warnings show the internal checks did exist, ethical people did try to uphold them. The problem wasn't ignorance. It was a deliberate, top-down override of the law. Pure brazenness.
Lastly, Mr. Johannes Matthias Wessels, the group COO. Initially, he was involved in some compromise on the Hall's contract.
Yes, initially perhaps trying to find a workable solution.
But later became a vocal internal dissenter. Gave strong advice against that DVS single-source contract with VR Laser. Outlined how bad it would be for Denel.
He saw the danger clearly by then.
And for his trouble. He was sidelined, excluded from meetings, eventually resigned. He was deemed obstructive to their plan.
Wessel's story shows the systematic marginalization tactic. He tried pragmatism, then took a principled stand when the illegality was blatant. Sidelining, excluding him. Classic capture playbook. Isolate dissenters, strip their authority, make their job impossible until they quit. It wasn't just about installing allies. It was about actively neutralizing anyone who still did their job properly.
These people represented the integrity that was systematically broken down. And the way in, the Trojan horse, was this company VR Laser and that big Holes contract. It sounds almost too neat.
It was strategic, premeditated infiltration. VR Laser Services, based in Boksburg, wasn't some unknown entity. It was actually a key supplier to Denel already. Solid, highly regarded, specialized in precision cutting, bending armor plate.
So its good reputation made it the perfect cover.
Precisely. An ideal, seemingly legitimate target. Its existing relationship made the acquisition look less suspicious than, say, a brand new shell company appearing out of nowhere.
How did the Guptas actually get control of it?
It was a calculated move in 2013. Salim Essa, working with Gupta-owned Weston Investments, remember, Dudazan Zuma had a stake they acquired majority control. The original shareholders, the Jayanis, were skillfully maneuvered out. Yeah. It wasn't a hostile takeover you might read about, but a strategic acquisition for a very specific purpose. The Zondo Commission was explicit. The entry of Mr. Essa and the Guptas into VR Laser was conceived for the purpose of using VR Laser as a vehicle to achieve the capture of Denel. It was premeditated, instrumental, not about growing VR Laser's legitimate business.
Chilling. Acquiring a company just to use it as a tool for corruption, and they immediately aimed it at the Hofeaster program.
Straight for the crown jewels.
That Badger combat vehicle needed outsourcing for critical parts, especially those armored hulls.
Yeah.
A lucrative contract the Guptas coveted.
Their way in.
Exactly. Highest value, most critical outsourcing need at the time. Huge sustained revenue potential. So a closed tender was initiated. Just 3 bidders invited. LMT, which Denel actually owned. DCD Doorbell. and the newly Gupta-controlled VR Laser.
And what happened next was
a masterclass in manipulation, systematic rigging of the process.
Let's break that down. VR Laser's initial bid, our $260 million, was far above competitors, way higher.
Almost double some estimates, yeah.
Yet somehow they were mysteriously allowed to revise its price downward, an unfair advantage nobody else got. How does that even happen in a supposedly fair tender?
It simply doesn't. Not in a fair process. That alone is a massive red flag, a breach of rules. It tells you the people running the tender were either colluding or completely intimidated, and there's more.
LMT and DCD Doorbell. They were controversially disqualified from getting their BBBE points. Broad-based Black economic empowerment points crucial for winning government tenders in SA.
Why were they disqualified?
Expired certificates, a technicality. But crucially, they were not given an opportunity to provide updated certificates, even though Denel's own empowerment partner was involved with LMT.
So let me get this straight. BBBEE is meant to promote economic participation for previously disadvantaged groups, giving them an edge in tenders.
Correct. It's a key transformation policy.
But here, legitimate competitors were knocked out on a technicality, weren't even allowed to fix it, effectively clearing the path for VR Laser. That undermines the whole point of the policy.
Completely. A cynical manipulation. And remember, the supply chain executives, Malalela and Malambo, they kept warning about these procedural flaws, advocating for open, competitive tender.
And they were.
Sidelined and then overridden. Senior management just pushed ahead. The whole thing was done in an overly hasty manner. The priority became get the job done quickly, not following the Constitution's Section 217 rules. Fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, cost-effective procurement. Speed over legality.
The commission's verdict was pretty harsh, wasn't it?
Utterly damning. Zondo found the award irregular, the process flawed. He slammed the executives who cut procedural corners, saying they violated their constitutional duty. And after all that manipulation, VR Laser won by a tiny margin, just 0.76% on the scoring.
0.76%. That screams engineered result.
It certainly raises massive questions. And this was just the start. Even back then, CEO Riaz Saloojee was showing resistance, told the Guptas directly, go through proper channels.
And how did they react?
Well, there was this one encounter, truly brazen. Tony Gupta apparently asked Saloojee point blank why he did not take money like everyone does.
Hey, just like that. Why don't you take money like everyone else?
Apparently so. Just stated as fact.
That single comment. What does it tell you about their mindset, their assumption of how things worked?
It's incredibly revealing, isn't it? It suggests this deep-seated belief, maybe based on experience, that bribery was just normal.
Yeah.
Standard operating procedure in certain circles, not about merit, just pay to play.
So Saloojee's refusal
made him an immediate obstacle, marked him as someone they couldn't co-opt. His integrity, ironically, probably sealed his fate. Led straight to the next phase, the purge.
The purge. Basically, a boardroom coup led by Minister Brown, mid-2015. Despite Denel's excellent performance under that 2011 board,
which she herself had praised.
Right. She abruptly announced the replacement of Denel's entire board. Just like that. Stunned observers. The only one kept on, Mr. Johannes Matseki,
who the commission noted had existing relationships with the Guptas. Convenient.
How did she even try to justify getting rid of a successful board like that?
She couldn't, not logically. Her public reason for excluding senior DPE officials like Tlokudi from the vetting process was bizarre. She claimed including them might lead to corruption.
Excluding anti-corruption experts to prevent corruption.
The Zondo Commission called it ludicrous. The finding was clear. She deviated from the usual vetting processes specifically to exclude senior public servants who might object to the dubious candidates being pushed forward by the Guptas. She actively dismantled the safeguards to enable capture.
And the new 2015 board she appointed. Conspicuously lacking skills, right? No chartered accountant.
A massive red flag. A stark contrast to the previous experienced board. Mrs. Marty Jancy van Rensburg called it not reasonable, a sacrifice of critical continuity. It weakened oversight deliberately.
And the appointment of Daniel Mantsha as chair, the guy struck off the attorney role.
Deeply problematic. Brown admitted she only found out about his history after appointing him. Her excuse for keeping him: he needed to be given a second chance. The commission rejected that, their conclusion. Mantsha must have been chosen by the Guptas because he was compromised, malleable, an asset to them, not Denel.
And the new board wasted no time. Within weeks, Saloojee, Malantlo, the CFO, Africa, the company's secretary, summoned to an audit committee meeting.
Ambushed, basically.
No warning, No specific charges. Just asked why they shouldn't be suspended over the DVS acquisition, a deal the previous board and other state bodies had already approved after vetting. Sounds like a setup.
It was nothing less. They protested, said they needed more time, offered arbitration, but the decision was already made. And the proof, that shocking letter from Mantsha, December 2015.
Remind us about that letter.
Mantsha basically blasted Dentons, the law firm, because their initial report didn't justify the suspensions. He then told them to essentially fabricate a report, which did.
An explicit instruction to fabricate evidence. Just wow, the sheer nerve.
It's chilling, actively subverting justice, creating a false narrative to cover their predetermined actions. The suspensions were sudden, out of the blue, minimal time to respond. The board had clearly made up their minds beforehand. Zano's conclusion was stark. The purpose of the suspension was to remove an obstruction from the path of the Guptas. Saloojee, in particular, resisted them.
And the utter cynicism, as the commission put it. Mantsha blocking disciplinary hearings, even though the executives wanted them to clear their names.
Right, because the allegations were just bluster. Hearings would have exposed the truth.
And then the final insult. Denel paid out huge settlements. Our $2.6 million to Saloojee, our $8.4 million to Malotlo, our $1.6 million to Africa. Basically, hush money.
Effectively, yes. A strategic, cynical payout. Avoided messy hearings, bought their silence, removed the last ethical leadership, and cleared the way for Mr. Zalak Enship, who had that relationship with Essa, to become acting CEO.
The path was clear.
Enship did nothing to suggest that he would resist any of Mr. Mantsha's moves. He facilitated the agenda. The path was clear for full capture.
With the main resistors gone, loyalists in charge, the Guptas moved to lock down their control through these really irregular single-source deals and that Denel Asia idea.
Institutionalizing the capture, essentially.
Let's start with the DLS VR Laser single-source contract, signed May 2015, just after the new board arrived. This wasn't just for one project, was it?
No, this was huge. It made VR Laser the single-source supplier for 10 years for all fabricated steel services and goods to Denel Land Systems.
Right.
Way beyond just the initial Hulls contract.
10 years exclusive. What did the commission make of that?
Slammed it. Manifestly irrational and unlawful, completely bypassed competition, locked Denel into this costly, non-competitive deal benefiting only VR Laser. Stefan Booger, the DLS CEO, pushed hard for it, blaming his frustration with Denel's processes.
Convenient frustration.
Very. Though he later admitted, grudgingly, it was irregular.
And again, the supply chain experts, Malalela and Malambo, advised against it. Repeatedly. Insisted on a proper tender.
Repeatedly. Malalela's advice, called legally sound and significant by the commission, but simply ignored, shows total contempt for rules.
And how did they finally push it through?
Audacious defiance. The DLS Executive Committee actually resolved that their agreement, the MOA with VR Laser, takes precedence over the group supply chain executives' conditions and Denel's own supply chain policy.
They just decided their deal trumped company policy and the rules.
Pretty much. Malambo, the supply chain exec, rightly refused retrospective approval. He saw it was illegal. So acting CEO Enship, he just wrote approved and signed the document himself. Overruled Malambo directly.
Unbelievable.
The commission called that logic ridiculous, nonsense of the fundamental principle underlying the Constitution, a direct, explicit gutting of the proper process.
And then came another one. December 2015, a similar deal for Denel Vehicle Systems, DVS.
Hot on the heels of the first one. Enship, acting on a definite instruction from Chairman Mantsha, pushed it through fast.
Despite warnings.
Serious warnings. From the COO, Johannes Wessels, he pointed out this deal would strip DVS of its core business making hulls and structures itself. And it would cost DVS an extra 15% for work it could do cheaper in-house.
Outsourcing core functions at a higher cost. That makes no commercial sense.
None whatsoever. Purely designed to funnel money to VR Laser. Enship dismissed Wessels' warnings as too long, ignored and overruled Malama's objections about illegality again.
So the commission saw the motive clearly.
Absolutely. The dominant purpose wasn't helping Denel. It was to bind Denel ever closer to VR Laser and thus to the Guptas, and improperly to gain control over an aspect of the business of Denel and Wessels for objecting, sidelined, excluded, marginalized for being obstructive.
And the final piece of this capture puzzle, the Denel Asia venture, early 2016. A joint venture between Denel and Gupta-controlled VR Laser, based in Hong Kong, targeting India and Asia. Sounds strategic, maybe?
On the surface, perhaps, but it was really an audacious attempt to create a legal front for siphoning funds offshore.
How so?
Well, it needed approval from DPE and National Treasury. Officials in both departments raised huge red flags.
Like what?
Lack of funding plans, inadequate business plans, serious questions about VR Laser and the Gupta's suitability given their growing political baggage and major political implications. Fundamental problems.
Were these concerns addressed?
No. Ignored. Minister Brown later controversially claimed conditional approval, but Treasury never gave a final, unreserved sign-off.
And the Commission's view?
Unequivocal. Denel Asia was a shameless attempt to benefit the Guptas. It made no commercial sense from the perspective of Denel. Why? Because VR Laser had no established expertise in the defense market, no demonstrable access to markets. They brought nothing to the table except the Gupta connection.
So just a vehicle to channel money.
Exactly. A vehicle for rent extraction. This venture marked the zenith of the Gupta grip on Denel. Their final big play to institutionalize the capture, bypass internal controls, and get direct access to arms deal money.
The cumulative effect of all this, the rigged contracts, the purges, it brought Denel to its knees.
Absolutely catastrophic. The once thriving SOE plunged into severe financial difficulty, almost on its knees. By mid-2021, there were media reports it faced liquidation.
From our $200 million profit to liquidation.
Think about it. A company celebrated just years before now couldn't even pay its employees regularly. Ironically, it even owed money to a strategic supplier, VR Laser, about $15 million at one point.
The irony.
A stark contrast to its position under the 2011 board. Enormous reputational damage, real-world consequences. Thousands of skilled jobs threatened, national defense capability undermined. Just devastating.
And as the tide turned, public opinion shifted, banks closed their accounts. The main players fled.
Yes. The Gupta brothers, Ajay, Atul, Rajesh, and Salim Essa, they fled South Africa, reportedly ended up in the UAE.
They escape, but the hunt for justice begins. A global hunt.
It had to be global. June 2022, a significant breakthrough, or so it seemed. Dubai police arrested Atul and Rajesh Gupta. Interpol red notices had been issued.
On what charges? The big state capture stuff.
Strategically, no. The arrest was based on a smaller Free State case, the R25 million New Lane investment fraud. Prosecutors used it as a shrewd strategy, a more manageable case to secure extradition, hoping to then pursue the much bigger state capture allegations involving Denel, Transnet, Eskom, get them back on SA soil first.
Did it work?
Unfortunately, no. A devastating setback. April 2023, the Dubai Court of Appeal denied South Africa's extradition request. Technicalities. Procedural grounds. Apparently, SA's paperwork had not strictly met the UAE's requirements. Things like not including a certified active arrest warrant. Incredibly frustrating.
A paperwork error sinks the extradition. Wow.
It highlights the immense challenge of international legal cooperation. Meticulous preparation is key. Meanwhile, Salim Essa, still a wanted man, sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury under Magnitsky. Interpol notices out for other associates, too. Essa even briefly tried to challenge the Zondervan report in court from afar, unsuccessfully.
Which brings us to the Asset Forfeiture Unit, the AFU, facing this massive challenge, this high-stakes treasure hunt to recover the looted billions. Hidden in complex corporate structures across borders, what can they actually do? What tools do they have?
It's daunting, but not impossible. They have several powerful tools, mainly leveraging international cooperation and legal instruments. First, the bedrock, mutual legal assistance, MLA, and treaties.
The official government-to-government channel.
Exactly. South Africa signed the UN Convention Against Corruption, UNCSC, and crucially, that 2021 extradition treaty with the UAE. It includes a vital MLA agreement.
So they can formally ask the UAE for help.
Yes. Request bank records, company registrations, ask them to enforce South African court orders like asset freezes or seizures. It's the legal backbone, but it needs political will from the other side. That UAE treaty is key, given where the Guptas went.
Beyond formal requests, how do they follow the money itself?
That's where financial intelligence units, FIUs, come in. Every major financial center has one, think FinCEN in the U.S. or Dubai's DFSA. The AFU can work with FIUs in places like Hong Kong or the UAE.
To get alerts on suspicious activity.
Precisely. These units monitor global money flows, looking for red flags, large, unusual transfers, shell companies, known corrupt individuals. They can sometimes freeze funds quickly if money laundering is suspected, buying the AFU time for formal action.
Are there other, maybe less conventional ways to trace assets hidden so cleverly?
Oh, yes. They can use specialized investigative firms and open source intelligence, OSINT. These firms are experts at untangling complex offshore structures. They use databases, leaked info like the Panama Papers, to find hidden links, beneficial owners.
And OSINT, publicly available information.
Even seemingly mundane stuff. A social media photo showing a Gupta next to a private jet's tail number, a public property record in London. These can provide crucial leads to trace and eventually freeze assets, connecting the dots.
Now, this sounds really powerful. Using the U.S. dollar clearing system, how does that help South Africa?
It's a major lever. Many big international deals, even between non-U.S. parties, get cleared through U.S. correspondent banks if dollars are involved, even briefly.
So if the money touched a U.S. bank?
The U.S. Department of Justice, DOJ, can assert jurisdiction for civil forfeiture. Their kleptocracy asset recovery initiative is famously aggressive. They can seize assets derived from foreign corruption if U.S. banks were used at any stage.
Is there a precedent for this working?
Absolutely. The 1MDB scandal in Malaysia, the DOJ seized over $1.7 billion mansions, yachts, art, because the illicit funds flowed through the U.S. system. They returned about $1.4 billion to Malaysia.
So the AFU could encourage the U.S. to act.
Exactly. Or the UK, if money landed in London property or banks, leveraged jurisdictions with strong anti-corruption laws and the will to use them. It's strategic forum shopping almost.
And Interpol. Beyond the initial red notices.
Their role continues. They have the I-247 Secure Communications Network for police forces worldwide and the International Asset Recovery Advisory Police Network, Interpol AR, that's for intelligence sharing, quick informal info exchange between investigators globally, real-time collaboration. Plus, monitoring developments in India, the Gupta's home country, could yield results, given Denel's past dealings there.
So it's a complex, multi-agency global effort.
It has to be. Joint task forces with counterparts in the UAE, India, maybe US or UK, pooling expertise, and constant diplomacy, nudging for cooperation on MLA requests, using SA's international goodwill in the anti-corruption fight, reminding partners that helping SA aligns with their own UNCSC commitments.
The Zondo Commission didn't just expose the rot, it offered solutions. What were its key recommendations for the AFU specifically on recovering these assets?
It laid out a clear strategy. First, reconstruct the financial map completely. Get a dedicated forensic team. Meticulously map every transaction involving Denel VR Laser, Denel Asia from 2013 on. Use the Zondo evidence as a blueprint. Fill gaps with bank records obtained via subpoenas or MLA. Crucially, identify the second and third hops where the money went after the first transfer. Follow every single rand.
Painstaking work. Once assets are identified, what's the first step? Seize them.
The immediate priority, Zondo advised, is to prioritize freezing over forfeiture, but ultimately do both. Money moves fast. Get preservation orders, asset freezes immediately on anything identified, stop it disappearing again. This needs coordination with foreign countries to mirror the freezes. Freezing stops the bleeding while the longer legal fight for final forfeiture happens.
Are there other legal angles besides just the criminal capture charges?
Definitely. Exploit all avenues of legal pressure, launch parallel civil forfeiture cases, often faster, lower burden of proof, and vigorously pursue tax evasion angles. State capture crooks often forget to pay tax on their loot. SARs can issue assessments on undeclared income, like kickbacks create debts and attach assets that way. Think Al Capone. It complements the AFU's work.
And finally, using South Africa's global position.
Yes, leverage international goodwill and spotlight. SA's fight against state capture got global attention. Sympathy, use that diplomatically. Press countries like the UAE, China, for Hong Kong, at high levels to honor cooperation promises. Remind them helping fight grand corruption boosts their own image, meets their UNCAC obligations, shakes off reputations as havens for dirty money. Turn it into a global imperative.
This whole deep dive into Denel, it's such a sobering reminder, isn't it, how insidious greed, calculated manipulation could just hollow out critical national institutions.
Absolutely. From the subtle infiltration via VR laser to those audacious boardroom purges, the systematic draining of resources through nonsensical contracts, it's a stark picture of betrayal of public trust.
Yet it's also maybe a testament to resilience. Accountability mechanisms kicking in, investigative journalists, civil society, the Zondo Commission itself, the AFU's ongoing pursuit.
There is that side, yes. The fight back is real, even if it's incredibly difficult. This quest for justice is a global marathon, full of legal hurdles, diplomatic challenges. It requires relentless persistence.
So as we wrap up, maybe a final thought for our listeners, reflecting on Denel's journey from pride to near collapse. What more needs to be done? Not just getting the money back, but stopping this kind of capture from happening again.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? fortifying institutions, safeguarding against this brazenness in the future. Because every asset recovered, it's not just money back in the pot.
No, it's symbolic.
It's a symbolic restoration of justice. Accountability, it sends that clear message. No matter how far you run, no matter how cleverly you hide the loot, the long arm of the law will pursue you, across oceans, across continents, making corruption hopefully a much more perilous gamble next time.